In 3, 2.
Hello and welcome to Streamers and Punches, the podcast from Sound Notion TV that looks at current events and new releases in the world of film music. My name is Bill Witham.
And I'm Kevin Wilt.
And this is basically our sort of summer roundup episode. We're just going to look at a lot of different things, some dealing with what's come out already and the scores and we'll talk about. And we're going to also look at what's coming up in the remainder of the summer. And then kind of our thoughts about what we've been listening to, whether we like it or not, and some other things in general that have hit the news. Speaking of, there's actually not too much to cover there, because then that'll free us up to jump into the big meaty discussions, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kevin, so Danny Elfman's got some new digs.
Yeah,
right?
Danny Elfman and his wife. I suppose this is film music news because it is Danny Elfman. But Danny Elfman and his wife bought a new house, and we've got a link to an article. There are a couple different ones out there. And you can see pictures of it, and it's, fancy and big and expensive and stuff. That's kind of
well. It does affect the world of film music because he'll no doubt put a studio in there, and if the studio sucks, then Elfman might have some crappy scores coming out. But if it's better,
you think that's how that works?
Yeah, they're tied in. It's totally related.
If he doesn't get every composer knows, if you don't have the right gear, you can't actually be a composer. So let's hope whatever studio he builds, he will buy the right gear, because that's what it's all about.
They could be nestled in a forest in this new house, and maybe the forest gives them more inspiration.
Maybe. I think Bill's proactively justifying a bunch of expenses on his own personal home studio now.
That's true. He's just thinking.
So maybe I did swap out a few things this summer.
Danny Elfman's going to go through an upgrade, so I better do it too.
I can do it too. It's keeping up with the Elfmans.
That's
it. Anyway. Okay, I feel like it's like part Streamers and Punches, part TMZ to be saying that Elfman's got a new house, because we were right across the street taking pictures of it. No, we weren't. Anyway, okay, and then
something super cool happened at Comic-Con last week. Well, I'm sure lots of cool things happened at Comic-Con. I was not there, but this one was particularly cool. Although it had a little bit of blowback, which I think it deserved. But after the Star Wars panel in Hall H, J.J. Abrams and a troop of stormtroopers escorted the audience outside to an amphitheater or pavilion setup where the San Diego Symphony then gave a free concert of Star Wars music to those people that were in attendance, which is really, really cool. There was even an introductory video by John Williams saying, apologizing that he couldn't be there. And sort of introducing the conductor and the orchestra and stuff. I think that sounds like amazing. One thing I was bummed about, and again, this is just a programming thing, but this is a reality. This is the new world we have to live in, Bill.
It's the 21st century.
It's 21st century. This concert was not opened with the 20th Century Fox fanfare and the Star Wars main title. It was opened with the Imperial March, which, okay, fine. But I would have preferred the main title, of course. But this is Disney's gig now. They're not going to get that 20th Century Fox logo anymore, which is a bummer. But that's the way it is. Anyway, I think that was a really cool event. That's of course a very expensive thing for Disney to put on, but they have lots of money. The fallout, which
Disney money is the new expression now to me. Disney money. It just means, like, as large as it is, it doesn't matter, because Disney money will just be thrown at it. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Sorry.
So, but the fallout from it, which isn't fallout, it just is inconvenient, was that nerd hero and podcaster extraordinaire Kevin Smith had his panel in Hall H right after Star Wars, and they cleared out his whole crowd.
Or did he? It's like no one's in the woods to witness something.
Yeah, well,
did it happen?
He was saying on Twitter how he's standing backstage like horrified because the stormtroopers are escorting his entire crowd out of the room. So he's thinking he's going to have to cancel. Luckily, enough people were still there outside waiting to get in that he had a decent-sized crowd of like 2,000 or something. And he did his thing anyway, and it went well, and people were grateful that he did it. But that kind of sucks. And I guess J.J. Abrams apologized very quickly and profusely to Kevin Smith that he had no idea that that's what was going to happen, and he never. Certainly, if he was going to pick someone for that to happen to, Kevin Smith would be the last person he would do that to, and all this kind of stuff. So, who knows? Maybe J.J. Abrams will end up on a Kevin Smith podcast in December as kind of a retribution. Who knows? But anyway, going to like a free Star Wars concert after having gone to the Star Wars panel at Comic-Con. That sounds like a pretty cool way to spend your day. I was not there. I wish I would have been, but what are you going to do?
Well, I mean, with the thousands of people that are there, I mean, I kind of followed a little bit, but I was just going to say if 6,500 people leave your Star Wars presentation, there's got to be another 7,000 waiting outside to get in. And my impression was that once you're in, you stay in, so that you can catch the next panel after that, because it's Hall H is as far as I know, is the largest thing there. So
I think so, yeah.
Every single thing that's in that room is going to be big. It was like, like we talked about the Marvel / 20th Century Fox, so X-Men and Fantastic Four and what's his name, Ryan Reynolds for
Deadpool.
What's his Deadpool. So like that's there. Superman, Batman's there. Star Wars is there. Doctor Who was there. Some other things. So yeah, if you missed the one, but anyway, it was music, so that's why we brought it up.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess the last piece of news that we should mention, which we will spend a huge chunk of time on a little bit later in today's show, is the very tragic passing of film music legend James Horner, which is very sad and, sad, I guess.
Unexpected. Yeah.
Very unexpected.
It's interesting. Alan Silvestri flies. He has a plane. He likes to fly, and it's just one of those things where they do that. Not die, but that they have their own planes. Yeah. They do. It's a hobby, I think, in a lot of ways. But it's sad. It's unfortunate. But yeah, we'll talk about maybe.
Sure. We'll get to that a little bit later in our bigger discussions. For the time being, Bill, why don't we discuss since we've gone through a bunch of summer movies already, being now the middle of July. What have you been listening to and or seeing lately that we should talk about?
So this has actually been a weird summer for me. I've gone to the theater to see a ton of things, and then when I've gone, by whatever strange set of circumstances, it's almost been each time to see Jurassic World, because I was always with a different set of friends that hadn't seen it. So I can talk about Jurassic World with pretty good authority after seeing it 4 times as a person just sitting on my ass.
I have seen it twice, and I'll talk about it with some good fake authority.
But I have seen that, and I've seen the Avengers: Age of Ultron, and there's been a couple other smaller movies I have seen, but I don't. There wasn't much in the score to talk about to begin with, so I don't even want to bring them up. But basically, those are. I mean, and let's face it, we want to focus on the ones that they're gonna have large scores to match the large visuals and the sort of. I don't want to say bombastic, but that's not an inappropriate word in this case. Let's see. Well, Kevin, do you want to know what I thought of it, or just what I've seen?
Well, since you mentioned Jurassic World, why don't we start there, and then we can kind of hit some other things along the way.
Okay. So to our listeners, Kevin and I have talked about this a great deal outside of the show.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna.
Well, we in fact we saw the movie together.
We did. We did.
And we went and now I think you had already seen it by that point, but we did in fact see it together.
Right. I see. So that was no. You were Kevin. You were my first.
Oh.
Right. Remember, we waited because the first 3 shows were sold out.
I hope I was gentle.
It was fine. But anyway, it was great. The movie's totally enjoyable. It's fine, and I've been reading all these blogs where they've tried to psychoanalyze the movie and talk about how self-aware it is and how there's a meta theme running throughout of just acknowledging that the movie itself is that the plot of the movie is about the movie and the franchise of Jurassic Park itself. Those things are there if you want to look for them. I kind of think those people have questionable lives and have nothing better to do. Go see the damn thing. If you like dinosaurs, I thought it was a lot of fun. And I mean, yeah, most of the actors are cast visually, But it was I mean, yeah. So the bad guy is kind of big and overbearing and kind of large and imposing. All right, check. You know, Vincent
But I mean,
D'Onofrio.
you're talking about Vince Vaughn's character, right?
Vincent D'Onofrio.
Vince, damn, I always get those
Yeah.
confused.
You get
single
you
time.
get Jurassic World mixed up with True Detective every
Sorry.
time. No,
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
No, I've done that since like I've done that forever. I've gotten the two Vincents messed up.
Well,
Yes,
I mean, he
yes,
was
Vincent D'Onofrio, he's
you know,
sort of big and intimidating,
right.
but he's also amazing.
Oh no, he's they have great actors in a lot of ways. They can come in and just read their lines, and you buy them right away. But
Yeah.
I even thought from a movie standpoint, it's kind of efficient because they don't really give much time to develop the character. So Chris Pratt is funny, good-looking, and just muscular enough that he's this very Indiana Jones kind of leading man.
Right.
And check, he's physically matching all that. And Bryce Howard is, very pretty, the lead, very uptight. She's organizing everything until, not a spoiler here, but things start getting out of hand.
What?
And she seems not equipped to deal with it. So, and she just wears all of that perfectly. So, boom. But I did like the international cast. There were at least 3 actors in there that had, fairly contributing roles, and they were, one was Irfan Khan, and he's a really great actor from India, and then you had
good. Yeah.
BD. I mean, after seeing the movie 4 times, I'm just like, man, that guy knows how to wear a suit, and he just has this like cool swagger when he steps out of the helicopter. He's just kind of awesome. And then BD Wong is the scientist,
I like that because
from the original Jurassic Park
character from the first movie.
Yeah.
And
he's the Leonard Nimoy of this franchise.
Yeah, he is the in the first movie he's a scientist. He's just a very nice guy. There's no like.
Yeah. He's
and
Mr.
in this movie he
Exposition.
actually gets to like.
Yeah.
Not be a super wholesome character, which is
and they have
surprising.
Him and the Irfan Khan's character have a really nice kind of like science versus morals kind of discussion, and it opens up the movie a little bit like, okay, there's something deeper here that they could confront. They don't really confront it, but they do pay lip service to it, and that's more than like anything they really do in Avengers.
That seems to be the thing that they leave open for the next film or whatever. So
yeah.
What did you think of the score? Let's talk about this in 2 different discussions because.
Well, I don't want to go on and on about the film, but right, the score.
Right. I think there are 2 big things to talk about with the score. Number 1 is the music that Michael Giacchino wrote. Number 2 is the use and
the music that John Williams wrote for it.
Yeah, it's the use and the placement of the music from Williams' original score.
Yeah.
So which one of those you want to start with?
So because there's more of the Giacchino music and less of the Williams, I'll talk about the Williams first.
Okay.
So there's moments. Okay, so this is from my point of view, and Kevin, I know we share opinions on this, but I'll just say this is my opinion. So the very first time I see the film, and they're going to the island, and you hear the theme from Jurassic Park start up. It even has the horn solo that I don't think is actually in the original movie. It's just on the soundtrack, but it's there, and all of a sudden the woodwinds come in, and the boy and his brother go into the island, and then you get the strings, and I can't help. But I was feeling some warm fuzzies. I was like, wow, it's 100% pure nostalgia. They had researched it,
yeah,
and they just like plugged right into like that pleasure center in my brain, and I really enjoyed hearing that music with the big kind of panning that they did into the island and everything on the island, and it was just I loved it. I loved the combination. There was in fact a couple of moments in there I thought, wow, this is what Williams' music kind of inspired, but they never quite used it with this imagery in the 3 earlier films. And so in some ways, it captures something that I thought, finally, like we see the entire island and all the people walking around in the shops and everything. But there were a couple lazy moments where they just, if you're going to take 30 seconds of music that pre-exist and just slap them into your film, then that does not remove your responsibility to still properly score the film. So, I mean, Kevin, I can let you elaborate on that in a minute, but there were a couple moments
that I want to.
Yeah, I won't steal that thunder. You take that away in a moment. But there were a couple moments that you still have to score the film, and you still have some responsibility there. But overall, I enjoyed it. Although there were moments, I enjoyed the use of the John Williams score. but there were a couple times that it did feel like just a radio station that switched over. So
Yes.
here's Giacchino's music, and it's just and okay, sure, it may be an unfair comparison, but it's just really thin music in a lot of key moments. And I've seen the movie to where I'm watching, and it's like, he could have done more here. This is a summer movie with a big budget. He can have more counterpoint. He can have more cool stuff in the orchestra, more lines, more things of musical interest, and he's just kind of putting in ostinatos, and they're not even really fun or interesting or I don't know. It's just they're just really sort of simplistic and kind of like.
You heard his Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just saying.
We're not saying we're surprised, Dave.
I know. Dave, you can have an entire were you really shocked statement at the end of this whole entire rant. You could do that too, because that would still be appropriate.
Now,
now
we have talked. This is not a new criticism that you and I have mentioned about some of Giacchino's work, where sometimes it's a little too simplistic, a little too repetitive. To me, in this case, it seemed like that was almost compounded because he was working on 3 movies at the same time. We've got Tomorrowland, right, Inside Out, and Jurassic World. And having seen those 3 films and listened to those 3 scores, this is maybe okay.
Right, you can comment more than I can. I still haven't had a chance to see
they all struck me as fairly watered down musically, and I wonder if it was just you've only got time for so many notes when you're working on 3 enormous projects at the same time.
It's like first draft of music. He gets a first draft done, and
it's
good enough. I got to move on.
All he had time for.
Yeah. So I got a little bit of I can do devil's advocate, but I do hear. I remember we've looked at a few of his films before, and I've talked about his scores and just what we don't hear. But there's a lot of other factors. He's trying to service the film first, and I don't fault him for that.
As he did, right?
And he's won a couple Oscars for this approach. This approach that he Up.
Up, yep.
Okay, but he's had other nominations, and
I think so. Yeah.
So he's in tight with Pixar and of course Abrams and everything else. So he's got enough support that he can kind of just keep doing this approach. But I just keep waiting for him to really kind of develop as a composer, and I feel like there's just a lot of missed opportunities. And then it's a little bit sad when a composer who's not taking advantage gets these huge film projects and they get this huge opportunity, and then they kind of just do that. So it just reminds me of when I teach composition lessons to people from high school, and they write these like ostinatos over and over and over, and then they just kind of modulate their melodies, which are usually very simple and diatonic.
Yeah.
And you can. I mean, I don't want to be. You're a teacher, so you're not snarky about it. You're not cynical or sarcastic, but you say, okay, these are ways to start from, and I'm going to show you things you can add to this to sophisticate the music and give it a little bit of nuance.
In those situations, I always go back to. In that case, the student has brought you a texture. They have not brought you an idea. And that's what his scores kind of feel like to me. Is there's stuff going on. There are textures. They're not necessarily ideas. And I think the biggest gripe I had with the music that he wrote in this Jurassic World score, because I think Inside Out was a little bit better. Doing those, like the Pixar movies, I think is much more his forte, even though people keep giving him these big action movies. At the climax of Jurassic World, and it's been out for like a month. It's made like $1 billion or something. If you haven't seen it, that's your fault. So I'm going to just spoil it for you. At the climax of the movie,
everybody dies.
Yeah, where the T-Rex is released and is fighting the Indominus Rex. That's what it's called, right? Yeah. The T-Rex comes crashing through like the main drag of the park and smashes through this big skeleton. Big, huge, big musical moment. And this is a moment where if you've got a big hero tune or something, you let it rip. And the musical idea that he uses to score this moment is just a really simple first 3 notes of a major scale. It's not enough to actually register as an idea, so there's no weight behind it. And he tries to force it by sheer volume. It's just
Yeah.
triple forte. He's got the trumpets in unison, just screaming these three notes. But volume isn't going to do it if there's no. You need a musical idea that's got some light behind the eyes, and that didn't. And it felt like a lot of the things. Now, I will say, once you get to the end credits and you start hearing some of his tunes again, some of the more gentle ones, it's like, yeah, they're original tunes, and those kind of worked for me. But to me, it was that big climactic moment that just didn't do it, and it felt like he was trying to muscle it through just with orchestration and with volume, and
5 trumpets all playing the same thing.
and a bunch of unison trumpets, and it's not enough if there's nothing like tangible actually there, like really in just the melodic sense. That was my big gripe about the music that he wrote. Now you mentioned that sort of switching radio station idea, which there are a few moments in that film where that feels like it was what's happening. In our last show we had mentioned that I think there were 2 tracks from the soundtrack that had been released streaming that you could stream before the album came out and before the movie came out. And one of them was like a 10-minute chunk. It opened with some Giacchino music for like 4 or 5 minutes maybe, and it jumps into like the John Williams theme, orchestrated and harmonized in the original way. And
you hear the
shocking.
difference.
It's shocking to go from one to the other. And I played that recording for a couple different friends of mine in different situations.
Yeah.
I told them just wait for it. I didn't even tell them what. Just wait for it. And that moment was absolutely palpable. It's just I equate it, and again, this makes me sound like a jerk, but it's not the first time. Why stop now? I equate it like it's all of a sudden there's a grown-up that steps into the room, and the sound changes completely, and it's kind of amazing.
Well, about as sophisticated as Giacchino gets is a major 7th chord that I could pick up, because that do re mi idea he kind of turns it into he's got it over a 1 chord, so it's just scale degrees 1 2 3. Then he does the same gesture again, but puts a 4 chord underneath it. So now it sounds like a major 7th chord. Anyway, for anybody that's just can fiddle around on a piano, you could come up with that. It's not hard to do. You can do it very quickly, which may be why he used it or whatnot, or he maybe thought it was a great idea. But Williams is coming from that jazz. He's coming from that jazz background, and he can bring it in an orchestral texture. It doesn't sound like jazz, but it's more colorful, and the harmonies are a little more dense. And and say like Alan Silvestri doesn't really do that, and Jerry Goldsmith has harsher sonorities as a very modern composer. But I would like Giacchino to grow from film to film, if that's not too much to ask.
Yes.
But I hear him like almost reverting, because his video game scores like Call of Duty, like they sound like John Williams. Now he's just trying to sound like. I'm gonna steal it, Kevin.
Okay.
A copy of a copy of a copy.
Of a copy of a copy. That's right.
A Xerox of a Xerox. So each generation is missing something that the previous one had.
And I wonder if maybe him taking on these 3 huge movies at once, maybe that does have something to do with it. Because like you said, in Call of Duty, and even in like The Incredibles is a great score. Like it's not that he can't.
Very John Barry, yeah.
Yeah, it's not that he can't do it. You just wonder if he's just is so overloaded he's just not having the time or something. I don't know.
You should do what Williams did. Take a big-ass break, like for a couple years, do like a little movie, and then maybe do a drama for Abrams. Don't jump back into another Star Trek.
Yeah, you don't have to do every... I mean, it's easy for me to say this because no one's calling me, but you don't have to do every $200 million movie that comes your way. But you don't, obviously that's tough to say no to, but...
The final insulting thought I've had is I cannot help but make a comparison because... if you go back to Lost, you got Giacchino doing the music. You got Abrams who's kind of overseeing it, but then you got Damon Lindelof who's writing it or helping run the show. And since then, Lindelof he's just a punchline on the internet when it comes to writing movies and TV shows. And he's a writer and he gets paid money for it, but most of the stuff he's touched, instead of turning to gold, it turns to hatred on the internet. And I just think of Giacchino as like the musical equivalent of Damon Lindelof. Like he writes a lot of notes, but it comes together in something that I just am not interested in when I listen to it, and it just even from a scoring standpoint, and but anyway, like I said, I'll end on a good note. I want to see him grow, and I want to see him do some risky stuff, and just have the music sound good. He's got good orchestrators, but for some reason, his music just doesn't sound good to me sometimes. Like, it uses quirky percussion and weird. I mean, the Planet of the Apes did some of this. I heard some of it in Jurassic World. Just like, how can you get through that many layers of defense, like amazing musicians, amazing orchestrators, and still have it sound weird or quirky or not even good? I don't know. It's mind-boggling.
What was the J.J. Abrams? Was it Mission Impossible 3 or 4? I think it was 3.
Abrams directed 3. He did the music for Abrams, and then 4 was Brad Bird, but also still Michael Giacchino.
Okay, I remember it was for Mission Impossible 3 then, which I think would have been one of his first movie scores.
I think it probably was one of his first big films.
And I just remember listening to it after having heard the great Danny Elfman Mission Impossible score, the really good Hans Zimmer Mission Impossible 2 score, and then all of a sudden Michael Giacchino's Mission Impossible score sounds like an episode of television. Like, it sounds small. And I felt like there were moments in the Jurassic World score that just it's kind of like it's not a huge orchestra, it's just never very dense.
It's kind of like if you're the little kid walking in a football player's locker room and there's all these football players around, and you like puff up your chest and walk around like you got muscles and you belong you belong there too. But that's kind of like, all right, we've railed on this enough.
Now you're just being mean, Bill.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
I don't even know where you're going with that.
It's just, well, I mean, he's trying. No, you know what I mean. Okay. Yeah. Anyway. Okay.
Just the last thing I would say about Jurassic World, which we were talking about the placement of Williams' music. I'm glad that they did it. Certainly, like you said, this movie was so fueled by nostalgia. There was no way they were not going to do it.
That we overlooked a lot of things. No, we didn't. We noticed them right away.
No, we noticed them, but we enjoyed it anyway. My thing with the placement of Williams' music is they used his stuff a couple of times early on. And when I say his music, I don't just mean the tunes. I mean, much of it was orchestrated and harmonized in a very, very similar way to the original. So it was almost, they re-recorded it, but it's almost as if they just dropped in the original recording. It was so similar. Which, again, I don't have a problem with that. My problem was that the couple of times they did it, they dropped in those pieces based on where they wanted, after 45 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute or however much Williams' music was in there, they wanted the final cadence to land with some particular beat of action. And the big one...
Which it did.
Which it did. And the big one...
So they tracked it. They tracked it correctly on a couple different occasions. So the ending has like all the justification in the world, like the ending. But continue.
So like in the big one was when at the beginning the kids are running through their hotel room and the younger one throws open the windows in the balcony and there's this big reveal of the park. And of course the moment of those windows opening is where they have the big musical moment line up. The problem for me was in the 30 seconds or a minute building up to that, they've got like this big glorious Jurassic Park music going
for a very domestic.
But it's accompanying the kids like riding the tram. Like there's the imagery is not such that it can support music.
That I didn't have as much a problem with as the entry into the hotel room. I know, and we're nitpicking. I mean, we're like on a molecular level.
Yes.
But if
you're total nerds right now.
First of all, if you're a film composer, you're part filmmaker, and you have to
acknowledge that.
You have to respect those cuts of the film for one thing. Now
you can the whole horn section and the whole cello section playing a tune in all of its glory doesn't necessarily fit a kid walking through a hotel room.
Well,
those two things don't match up.
Well, sure. And what I was going to say is when they're sitting in the tram monorail thing, and to me that was the part, I mean, after seeing it now 4 times, that's the part where the sort of horn melody comes in, the hymn-like melody. So there it has this sort of warm, relaxed feel, and they are sitting down, riding on a monorail, and I was like, okay, it's all building, and I know it's building to something musically, and then the kid gets up and he runs to the front, and there's some swelling in the music there, and it's like, okay, all right, this is all right. There's no like real big crimes being committed here, but then there's a cut, and then it goes to the hotel room, and then now the music's big, and it's gonna.
At this point, the tune is there.
Yeah, the tune's there, and it's gonna get even bigger. But they're not changing it because that's just how it went in the original movie. They're not really making any adjustments there.
Which they should have.
Now, and if it's a pure montage, then you can get away with anything in the film as long as music connects it all. That's like definition of a montage. There's a bunch of different scenes cut together, and you're ignoring all the cuts because the music is the glue. But the thing is they wanted to have their park and eat it too. No, cake. Okay, sorry, that didn't work. That's a pun.
No, that didn't work.
They wanted to have their cake and eat it too by cutting to another scene and having dialogue in the hotel room, which grounds the scene and sort of snaps you out of the moment. But then the music continues to rev up, and then the kid just runs up to the window, throws up in the
shutters or whatever.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, just kidding. We're not going to stop here and talk about the hotel room. We are going to lead up to this big musical moment. Yeah. So it's a little bit like they could have. Yeah, that maybe if I was Giacchino, I would have said, it's a little weird. I want to play this scene all the way through with the music, but it feels weird when they start talking and let the filmmakers know about that. But it looks like they were just, screw it, full steam ahead. Just ignore it.
And you brought up a good point, which had that scene played out more like a montage and had there been no dialogue, that music probably would have been fine.
Because then the music would have driven the scene, but then when dialogue comes in, then the sound guys have to crank the music down, which is... Now you're working against all these strings.
Now we're talking about war crimes. That's what we're talking about
now. But anyway, I'll end on a positive note here. When Bryce Howard, at the end, and it's happening, what's going to happen. She's like Danny or whatever that guy's name is, Laurel, whatever that guy's got a funny name. The control guy. He's like the opposite of Dennis Nedry from the first movie because he stays. He's like the mirror opposite. He stays the longest. Anyway, he has a relatively clean area. It's just dinosaur figures.
He's got a sloppy workstation. Not as
sloppy, but not
anyway,
as sloppy.
Your point
is that he unlocks the Tyrannosaurus gate, and right at that moment, Giacchino just brings in this percussion, and there's no pitch. It's just this nasty, like, and seeing that a couple times, it's like, that is so wonderful, because it's just these, like, drums of anticipation, and the drums are huge, and something huge is about to happen. And it is really exciting, and it's really dramatic, because you're at a moment also where you're not exactly sure what the outcome's going to be, even though you can probably guess. But that was just a cool scoring moment, and so I want to champion those and say, good job, Michael, but please, like, learn some more harmonic vocabulary and some texture, some contrapuntal stuff. Yeah, just it doesn't hurt, and you can still do that in film music. And you're not getting away with stuff. You can still do that and provide musical drama. But anyway, I'm kind of exhausted. I don't know if I want to talk about Avengers. I just bought the CD and I was listening to it. And first of all, Elfman did not come in like he said and do like just a couple cues. He's got 11 freaking cues on that score, and Brian Tyler has like 16.
We have since now moved on to Avengers: Age of Ultron. I suppose what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, did you have anything? Okay. Well, and it's not even. And I know. It's like, what is it that I want? Well, the best film music has the level that it satisfies the film, but then it has something extra because these are good professionals and they're good composers who put these scores together. And Avengers is just noise from beginning to end. And here's the funny thing. They brought in Elfman to do arrangements of Silvestri's theme, and that was the only thing I really remembered other than just loud percussion and ostinatos and loud brass chords when I saw the movie the first time. That was all I remembered was hearing Alan Silvestri's theme. But it takes two composers who aren't him to create a score that uses his theme. Anyway, but I will say some of the Elfman arrangements are really cool because that's what he said he was going to do. He's going to come in and create some really kind of gnarly, twisted, darker takes on Alan Silvestri. But what's the backstory? Did they call up Alan and he was like, "Nah, I don't want to do it."
I mean, I don't know. That's possible. I don't see why not.
But
I feel like I've come, and I should also mention that I just watched Ant-Man today, which had a score from Christoph Beck. I think, and we've talked about scores to Marvel movies a lot. I think that
they're the sacrificial lambs.
Yeah, I've just come to the conclusion that I think Marvel, just the way they produce their films, maybe they're just kind of afraid of having like a big score, but that's just not. Obviously humor is a part of what they do. It tends to be a very colorful palette and everything. Obviously, there's lots of action. There are lots of characteristics you can point to that the Marvel movies have in common. Having a score that you don't really notice a whole lot is one of those characteristics.
Yeah.
In the rare occasion when that wasn't the case, the big one being Captain America, the first Avenger, and to a lesser extent, Alan Silvestri's score to the first Avengers movie, those are kind of the exceptions. Everything else has been largely forgettable. And it seems like that's how they want it, I guess.
And every moment in Age of Ultron score that starts to get interesting is always because it refers back or it's quoting the Silvestri music.
Yeah.
But I will say, kudos go to Elfman for some really cool, twisty versions of it. I mean, just some changes in orchestration, or they're just he's just doing variations. But that's what composers can do really well, while meeting the needs of the film. Right. But again, I mean, it's nothing against Brian Tyler. I'm sure he's just writing the cue, and Kevin Feige or Whedon is like, no, I want more percussion. Could you make it sound less intelligent? I'm sure, because that's the outcome. It's just a lot of banging and it's just noise. It's just but when I got out of Avengers, I was like, that movie was just a big mess. I mean, it's fun to see all those guys, but they were just setting up a bunch of other things. It wasn't as fun, and it didn't feel like Whedon had free creative control. Yeah. So I really think they do to their composers what they do to their directors, which is they kind of neuter like whatever they potential.
Well, I think you talk about the kind of the branding of all these Marvel films and how many of these movies there are now, and they all have to belong to the same universe. Maybe what they're doing with the score is the correct thing to do, because if you get a musical score that is very stylistically focused and identifiable, that maybe starts to cause.
You think musically that would overshadow?
Like it.
Do you think it would musically overshadow in another team-up movie?
No. Well, I mean, maybe that's part of it. But if you have, let's say you score to one of these Marvel movies with like the Danny Elfman Batman score, which has such a focused style and characteristic.
Yeah.
How all of a sudden are you going to then, when the next hero in the same universe has their movie, how are you going to do something that can
that is also
blend
unique
with that in the next Avengers or something?
Yeah, well,
if everything is just generic enough,
then
it's never going to cause a problem.
Their answer is you play it safe, like all the way through.
Yeah.
And you make it safe and generic and a crap load of drums and all that. So yeah, and
I'll say, having seen Ant-Man today, Christoph Beck is certainly one of the most active composers in Hollywood. His list of credits is enormous, and he's does a ton of projects. But he's not one of those composers where I think you're going to necessarily listen to one of his scores and know that it's him. He's kind of a master chameleon.
Mm-hmm.
He can do any sort of movie. I mean, he's done all sorts of like comedies and big action movies and all sorts of stuff. If you listen to a John Williams action score, you know it's John Williams. If you listen to a John Williams comedy score from like the 80s or 90s, you know it's John Williams. Christoph Beck is kind of the opposite of that. He's able to do all sorts of different genres, and it just kind of blends in stylistically, which that in and of itself is certainly a skill. Don't get me wrong. It takes some special chops to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it also his scores never stand out.
What's a Christoph Beck score sound like?
Yeah, I can't answer that question.
If it's a comedy score, it's strings and piano and maybe some woodwinds. Like everyone else's romantic comedy score.
Right. I will say in Ant-Man there were kind of a couple of funny scenes that I really liked the way he treated them. Ant-Man, and if you've read any reviews about it, if you haven't seen it, it's yes, it's a Marvel superhero movie, but it's also like a big heist caper.
It's a heist,
kind of
yeah,
movie.
heist movie.
And there are a couple of moments where Christoph Beck scores it in kind of a cheeky Mission Impossible TV sort of way, where you've got like some bongos and some Ocean's 11 kind of stuff. So he's able to tap into that caper movie vibe, which is kind of fun. But when it turns into big superhero action stuff, it's just generic horns and trumpets and strings and drums. And
how's Evangeline Lilly in the film?
Yeah, she's all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about Michael Douglas? Is he fun?
He's good. He's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
He's
all
good.
right. How would you rate it compared to other Marvel films? Like better than the Hulk movies?
Yeah, it's
that was kind of a joke.
Ones, but it also seems a lot more disposable.
Okay.
It seems like much more of a throwaway kind of cutesy thing. So yeah.
Okay. All right.
There you go. Let's get to like the big news topic, which we don't have to kind of spend too much time on this, just because it would be easy to kind of just kind of bring things down a little bit. But I mentioned earlier the untimely passing of James Horner.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, yes, it's tragic, and of course we feel for his family and colleagues and various people he's worked with, including James Cameron has come out and talked about working with him and kind of how much of a stand-up guy he was and stuff like that. And it's certainly sad because he was a young guy. I think he was maybe 60 or 61, and he was one of the few guys left who does have like the big elaborate orchestral chops and would still write that way. And so he could have easily been in the position of John Williams, where he'd have 30 years more of doing these kinds of scores.
Yeah.
So it's sad we're going to miss out on that. It has been nice to see people, particularly on social media, people react to it and really use it as an excuse to rediscover a lot of his music, which I know I did in the immediate aftermath. I've gone back now and listened to
Me too.
The Rocketeer and Braveheart and Star Trek II, and it's been a while since I've listened to those scores, and they are just fantastic stuff.
I just love how he was always so emotional. Like the music it just was not even worried about it. It was very melodramatic, and he was kind of like the soap opera of composers to me. I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, he provided when the movie needed to make you cry, like he could tap into an emotional response.
He's really good with like those goosebump moments. Like,
and it was
goosebump moments.
And it was, I mean, movies like Braveheart that makes men cry, movies like Titanic that makes ladies cry. I mean,
you cried at Titanic too. Come on.
Now I was glad to get out of the theater because it was hard to see it in the theater at the end because the room was foggy and stuff. No, but he just...
There was somebody in the projectionist booth chopping onions.
that's what it was. And the onion, like, chemicals in the air, like, what got down into the theater. No, I grew up with Rocketeer and Star Trek films and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and I mean, it's interesting because I always thought there was kind of a mischievous, impish side to Horner, like how he would sometimes borrow large passages from existing classical music. But that seems like a thing we don't even talk about anymore because no one else knows classical music to steal from Copland, Prokofiev, or Shostakovich or Bernstein. And so the fact that 30 years ago Horner would do it and it would make the music snobs kind of put their nose up. Now it's kind of like, well, I wish Michael Giacchino and Brian Tyler, I wish they listened to more Copland, Bernstein, or Prokofiev, or John Adams, or Thomas Addis, or somebody, so that they could hear kind of like how music is actually alive right now, and maybe take some ideas or inspiration from it. And Horner would often do that, and sometimes there was always kind of fun stories about lawsuits and things like that. So he was kind of, he was no angel, and yet at the same time, I think he gave the producers and the director exactly the score they wanted, and the audiences always seem to agree. And it's fun music, and so for example, like his score to Willow, I wanted give like full disclosure here. So Tim, or rather Omni Music Publishing, has issued a statement that they're going to be producing the Willow score next. So that's out. That's not news from me. That's already been said publicly, and that it still is being worked on, and was being worked on before his passing. So it wasn't something that was being done to make a quick buck or anything like that. But I'm working on one of the cues for that, and it is interesting to see how clear the orchestration is and how clear the textures are, and to see how he kind of operates and gets some of his musical devices created and how he gets certain things done dramatically. And it's just really fascinating to see it from the inside. And it's just really, really cool. There's a lot of things to learn there. But anyway,
in the wake of his passing, he had done a TED Talk a while ago that hadn't been released because it hadn't been released on the internet because it had contained some musical examples of his that they didn't have permission to actually post it. So it was re-edited with any of the examples removed, so it's just him talking. It's totally worth checking out. It's because he brings up a really good point, which is, as a film composer, he doesn't own what he does. It belongs to someone else. So if he wrote some nice theme or did something that he really liked, he's unlike other artists. He can't then turn around and build on it for his next project because he doesn't own it. He doesn't even have access to it. Mm-hmm. And he talks about some of the other issues of being a film composer, but it's just really, really fascinating to hear him talk about that.
That is kind of, I'm not trying to slam him, but that is kind of ironic because he would often...
Because if anyone tried to do that, it was him.
He would come very close to basically just reusing ideas from certain... Or he would take a device that he would take from another composer and then use it over and over until everyone just associated with him. But I say that with love. I mean, it's just, I can't tell you how many of those Rachmaninoff chromatic trumpet triplets I've been notating this weekend in just this one cue alone for Willow, and they're all in there, but they're not originally from him, but he kind of owns it after a while. He kind of uses it so many times.
He's using more than Rachmaninoff did.
It's become a Hornerism in a way, but
careful how you say that.
But it's I will miss the fact that we don't get new scores from him. I also was sad that in the last 20 years after Avatar and Titanic and the first Spider-Man, he said in an interview he's really picky now, and that's that balance between success and job and output, is that when these composers are I guess still kind of young and trying to prove themselves, that they are going to have a larger output. But he did, like James Cameron said, he worked really hard in the 80s, and it caused a lot of friction and problems with his scheduling and getting some of the projects completed in time. So maybe he just tried to learn from it, but he didn't do the Spider-Man sequel. He passed on that, and then they got Hans Zimmer and his team to do it. And I miss that he didn't continue, and then we'll miss that there won't be any other.
I kind of wonder. So the director of The Rocketeer, Joe Johnston, the same director who did the first
Captain America
movie. And as much as I like the Alan Silvestri score, I wondered what would that team have looked like if James Horner had scored the first Captain America with Joe Johnston directing.
I'll tell you.
That Rocketeer score, which is same kind of thing, like 1940s comic book.
Yeah.
Like, would we have basically gotten a second Rocketeer score, and how awesome would that have been?
I think yes, very awesome, and the sound of it would be lots of trumpet solos and lots of snare drum.
Yes.
I mean, and that's his Apollo 13 approach.
Yeah, but it's another great one.
But that's just my first gut instinct, is that that's probably what we would have. But But unless Joe Johnston says, I want more horns, like Rocketeer, then we would have gotten like Rocketeer .2.
Which would have been great.
I would have loved that.
Speaking of too much awesome for the world to handle, a couple weeks ago, the Berlin Philharmonic with Simon Rattle, their current music director, arguably, I don't know, Bill, Dave, maybe solidly top 5 orchestras in the world, right? That's an easy argument.
Easy, maybe even top 3.
Probably a decent argument for number 1, maybe.
Yeah, they're always up there.
I think at that point you're just talking about a matter of taste.
Sure.
Yeah.
And by that point, everyone's gonna have a different opinion. But they did an outdoor summer concert of film music, which usually when an orchestra does a film music concert, they bring in like a pops conductor and stuff like that. And the Berlin Phil doesn't strike me as an orchestra that normally does those kinds of concerts anyway. But they did with Simon Rattle conducting, and I looked at the program, and they did some Korn Gold. So, and I haven't seen the performance of that, because I'm pretty sure if I heard the Berlin Phil playing Korn Gold, my head would explode because it would just be too awesome. But there has been a trailer floating around for that concert of them playing the first couple minutes of the Star Wars main title.
The concert arrangement of
the concert arrangement of it.
Yeah.
Which it's certainly not the most rehearsed, polished, cleanest performance of that music you're ever going to hear, but just to watch the Berlin Phil and Simon Rattle playing that music, and it's really interesting because you're watching players, and there are players, people in the orchestra are smiling while performing this music. Simon Rattle is smiling while conducting this music.
Yeah.
And you watch some of the wind players, they're almost struggling to maintain their embouchure because they're smiling while they're playing it, and it's so great to see that.
Because they're all thinking, "Gosh, this music is so terrible," but the masses love it. No, I'm just kidding.
They are enjoying it just as much as everybody else.
Yeah. Well, first of all,
such a wonderful thing to watch.
This is the orchestra that has a legacy of doing the great Germanic music, like Wagner. So which is that leitmotif approach in his operas is what inspired Star Wars and then later Lord of the Rings. Anyway, so they're right at home playing this, but it's so funny because the two main sources, I think, that helped cultivate the sound of Star Wars are Wagner and Gustav Holst. So you have a German orchestra with a British conductor.
Right.
He's got all the British you need. So, I mean, as far as authority, you've got the right players, the right conductor, and then also just because as a former trumpet player, and I don't know if Dave's seen the video, but Dave's also a trumpet player. They're playing all these Star Wars licks on their rotary trumpets. So it basically looks like they hold the trumpet like a sandwich instead of...
I don't know if rotary trumpets is a great choice for doing Star Wars, but okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, but the sound
it's certainly
was
a different tone than the London.
We need some goddamn American piston valve trumpet.
That's damn right.
America. I thought the high B flat sounded really clear and really tasty.
Yeah, but how tasty do you want that opening B flat? It should have a little edge to it, no?
No, I don't mean like tasty, like it's nice and cute and rounded. I mean like it was brilliant.
That's how I heard it, as being a little bit more rounded and a little bit more polished, and not quite as bright. And I feel like I want that note to be pretty bright.
Dave says.
Dave doesn't have anything to say about that. I agree with Kevin. It needs to be a little bit balls to the wall.
Yeah.
You know what? One of the biggest problems, though, is the last 3 prequel films with London Symphony, and it's, I think, just a change in times and recording techniques and recording engineer tastes of the balancing. Yeah. The trumpets sound way neutered. They just...
I mean, that first chord should hurt a little bit. In a good way.
It should be a little laser beam. A little laser beam.
Yeah, it's literally a wake-up call, a blast from the orchestra to stop what you're doing and pay attention.
And I love that I think it was the 1997 like 2-disc special edition re-recordings that came out. Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but the one for the episode 4, New Hope, has one of those like hidden tracks in the end of the first disc.
So that's not a re-recording. It's just a reissue of the London original performance, but it's really awesome. It's really cleaned up.
No, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're correct. You got to wait like 9 minutes.
It's a whole chunk of silence, and then you get to hear a bunch of takes.
Yeah, outtakes
of the main title, and you hear like, even the guy like take 17, and then you hear it, and there are all sorts of different versions of pickup notes before that big B flat chord. And they chopped them all off and just said, "Here's a big giant B flat major chord in your face."
Right.
So much better that way.
Yeah, no, it was basically like a dirty 5 chord, you know?
Right, yeah, exactly. And it's like here, there's no warm-up, I'm just going to hit you in the face, and it's great.
Yeah, and I love that they did it. They said, no, cut, there's no jumping into this. Let's just jump right into it and smack right there. And they did, but you know, that 70s, man, everything recorded in the 70s just sounds like dirty, grungier by default. Yes. Like they knew how to record, but they were coming out of the 60s where they're like, we're still working on intonation. Because
Well,
this
that original,
idea,
the first Star Wars score is just from a recording standpoint is a lot grittier than
when you listen to
even
the
a couple of
basses,
recordings you get from him a couple years
yeah,
later.
when you listen to the basses play, like some of the desert
Like
music,
you can like hear the rosin coming off the bow.
exactly,
It's just like it's
exactly.
kind of gross in an amazing way.
And there's even parts in Empire when if you put it in headphones or you just close your eyes and listen between two large stereo speakers, you can tell the way they've got it mic'd is like everybody in the brass section is all mic'd. But then the strings, I believe, are mic'd with overheads. I mean, they're mic'd up close, but the balance is that if a brass player like breathes, you kind of get a lot of that detail and it's very crisp. But strings, it seems and it feels like they got them a little further back, so you're hearing more of a group unison. So it's not stringy and kind of individual sounding. It's more blended, which makes sense. But that also means that they got way more mics and way more attention on the brass sections. And now I just feel like I really hate some of the sounds in the 3 prequels. And yet some of the cues later, like, inside Phantom Menace with some of the action cues, I love the way they sound, but those main titles do not sound ballsy like they did in the 70s. They sound like politically correct mixes of the orchestra.
But they still sound, it's still great.
No, I mean the newer versions don't sound as ballsy.
They don't, but I still like them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
There are times listening to the original recording. There are times when it's maybe just a little too messy for my taste.
Well, certainly now everything's refined, but it may be that Stravinsky Rite of Spring syndrome, where all the orchestras are now so polished and so good.
Now it's comfortable and it's polished
and so everything sounds safe because it's easier to create. So you need to make it like either raise it a half step to make it hard again, or somehow. Well, like the Superman Returns re-recording, they recorded a bunch of main titles and other cues that John Williams wrote in the 70s, and they recorded in when did Superman Returns come out?
2005 maybe?
2005, 2006, somewhere in there. So John Ottman's in there with Damon, in whatever his last name is, to record the orchestra, and they're in Hollywood, which is not the London Symphony. And so all the trumpet players, well, I don't know if London would have done this either, but the trumpet players all come in with these different specialty horns. So they'll play it on a high D or E flat trumpet, or maybe just switch to a pick, because the Superman theme kind of goes above the staff and stays there for a little while. And so everything they play...
You call them cheaters, Bill? Is that what you're saying?
I don't call them cheaters, but it makes it sound easier. And the London Symphony guys sounds like they're playing it on a B flat or a C trumpet, which is the bigger horn, and it sounds like you can hear the struggle. So when Superman needs to get to that high C to be triumphant, you can feel the struggle and you feel victorious along with the trumpet player. Same with the Star Wars main title. And when you play it on these other horns and you make it too easy, I get why they do that from a job standpoint, because they want to keep their job, but it takes a little bit away from the music because you don't hear that I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you could argue it either way. You want polish, you want it smooth and soft and rounded, but I'd like a little more grunge, just a little bit.
Victorious, we should say. Victorious is the natural default state of a trumpet player in the wild.
When you find them, right? Don't feed them.
I think
wet.
Possibly we have reached our core.
Don't let them play trumpet after midnight.
This particular episode of Streamers and Pumpkins. I think it's time to hang it up because we are nitpicking about so much stuff today.
It's nitpick episode.
It's great, but and our audience of like 5 people is probably struggling to hang on, and so I think we've probably stretched things as much as we can.
All right. That's a good idea. Okay, so that'll do it for this episode.
Plus our next episode will have the kind of remainder of the summer films to come back and talk about. So
yeah, we'll do like an update part 2.
Yeah.
So all right, that'll do it for this episode. You can listen to us on soundnotion.tv/SAP, where you can subscribe to our show, leave comments, and find links to the music we spoke about. You can also subscribe to the show through iTunes. My name is Bill Witham.
And I'm Kevin Wilt.
Thank you for listening.
All right, that worked really well. Thank you, guys.
Cool.
I will also say
I'm really glad that
a good long silence at the end because not everybody that does
yeah.
podcasts
I'm really glad. I don't.